Aloha, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. If you guys notice the music change, it's a Halloween event going on right now. And we are doing the spooky champion, Komodo, the skeleton assassin. So, in this series, this is Evaluate the Epic. Hello, my name is Sprinklebeard. We stream over on twitch.tv/Sprinklebeard if you're ever interested in joining us, or if you need new player help and content, blah, blah, blah. Let us get to Komodo. So, Komodo is a fighter in this game, and he's by far one of the easiest epic fighters you can get by linking your account to your Facebook or to other certain social media platforms. So we just go up here, settings. Whoops, that's not settings at all, is it? Yes, account binding. So if you bind your account to either your Google Play, your Facebook, or whatever VK is, I'm not very familiar with it, you can get Komodo for free on your account. Now, he is an epic fighter, so he will be very advantageous for a lot of newer players to get. Specifically, though, something I want to bring up is if we go into our summonings, he is the last of our summons that we can fuse, and I bring this up specifically because in this content, we are very focused on new player content. So if you were to use a shard and you were to get Komodo, or let's say you just love the way that he looks and you fuse him, what materials should you give him? So materials being things like dust, being things like awakening stones, taking him up to 6-star. Is he worth it? So that's the whole point of this video, is to evaluate that use of resources. With that being said, these 4 epic champions, and then Abomination being the 5th champion that you can fuse, I typically don't encourage players to use a lot of awakening stones on them at first. Now, I say at first because ideally you can just fuse extra copies of him. The longer you play this game, you will get to a point where you are getting so many copies of these champions that you will just always have a backup copy of said champions. Or like Spring, I can't imagine I will ever use Spring ever again. It is not hard to be like, cool, I can just sacrifice her to Komodo and I can just keep awakening Komodo over and over again. And especially if you like him, I do heavily encourage this. We'll get into that during the skill review section of what he gets by awakening him. But a lot of champions do change significantly once fully awakened. So with that being said, save your awakening stones for other champions. Right now, the huge one that we encourage more than anybody else is Wrath. Wrath is just a very consistent workhorse of a champion with amazing lifesteal. We often call him the legendary wrapped in purple, right? Is that his stats are just so good, and then what his awakenings do are very different than Komodo. So with that being said, let's get right into it. So just like Wrath, so Wrath was episode 1. Komodo is a fighter, which means that he's a ground unit. He's going to be on the ground. He's going to be tanking damage from the enemies. He is going to be dishing out damage with his dual daggers. And specifically, his ultimate allows him to put a bleed on the target. Now, Wrath originally does not have any dots or damage over time effects. So we're going to be putting these two side by side a lot in this video, and it is not to make Komodo look less, and I don't think it's necessarily fair to compare him to Wrath all the time. However, I do want to stress that by comparing them side by side, I do want to showcase that Wrath is probably a much better use of your first resources, things like dust, things like those awakening stones, and then perhaps after you fully awaken and fully dust up your Wrath, if you love Komodo, yes, you should then switch over to Komodo. Let's talk about the skill set, and then we can determine where Komodo is best used at. So he has a physical attack, deals 75% damage, scaling up to 85%, to one enemy 2 times. So ultimately, this goes up to 85%. This means you're striking one enemy twice at 85%. Now, if anybody's wondering why I don't condense those into, instead of 85%, just saying 170% damage, The reason is that he's doing 75% of his attack, right? So at 6-star, fully awakened, blah, 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 he's at 3,462, which is pretty comparable for all of our epic fighters. As we go through the series, you will see consistently where we're at. Attack interval, he has the standard attack interval at 2.6 seconds. That is absolutely normal and baseline. I will say it's kind of weird to me that he has daggers and that's not faster. I would assume that's because he's part of the Nightmare faction and they get an attack speed steroid just from having Wrath in your party. So again, another reason to have Wrath in your party. It actually boosts up Komodo, both his attack, like his base stats and his attack speed. His stats are very good. The difference though is that if we were to take 75% of this, so actually here, let's just do that real quick. So 0.75 times 3,462. So he would be doing, I'm going to say 2,600, 2 times to an enemy, assuming that the enemy has 0 armor, right? But if we were to take that same amount, 3,462, and multiply it by 170%, we get a very, very different number. Obviously, at no point is he doing nearly 5,900 damage to an enemy. And that's the difference, is that when we start factoring in armor, so let's say we have Komodo, and he's attacking an enemy Komodo. There's a point in the campaign where that can happen. The point of this, though, is that if we take this number, which is that 170%, and then we minus from it the armor of enemy Komodo. I've already messed up. Right? He's doing 3,800 damage. But if we do it the way that the numbers are intended to do, right? 3,462, so multiplied by the 75% damage. I'm sorry, that's his base damage. Obviously, after we dust him, we scale him up. But we do this and then minus that 2,055 armor. He's only doing 541 damage twice. And that is more realistically what he is going to be doing. So even though he is striking twice and that amount in total is more, he's just attacking more frequently. What this means is having extra attack on him and extra attack speed will be very valuable for Komodo, as well as it does say continuous physical attack. It just means that he's kind of a Gatling gun. He's just going to be constantly attacking, and that continuous attacking does have its place in this game. Next, we're going to go into his passive, Blood Liquor. Each attack has a 15% chance to deal 230% damage. So with this, this 230% damage can scale up to being 260% damage, and then the trigger chance can scale from 15% up to 20%. This is again another reason why having more attack speed on him is going to be even more beneficial. We have a chance for these giant ticks of damage to happen, and it goes from a 15% is roughly a 1 in 6 chance. It's a little bit higher than 6. But we can get it down to a 1 in 5 chance, which obviously, in terms of chances, 1 in 5 is a lot better for you than a 1 in 6. Or the more simply way, right, 20% is a much better chance of something happening than a 15% chance of something happening. This is definitely where a lot of his damage can come from. So he is a champion that I would say much more relies on attack speed than many other champions. However, right now the meta in the game is to stack as much attack damage on your champion so that they're doing consistent damage. And this is kind of a roll of the dice effect. So it's not that we want to stack tons of attack speed on him. We are looking for attack speed as a substat for him. Potentially more than, like, let's say crit. So if you're finding gear that has attack percentage and attack speed, give that to Komodo, because your chances of him outputting extra damage will be better. And then yes, by all means, if you get crit rate, I do heavily encourage crit rate as much as I encourage attack percent damage. His ultimate It lasts for 35 seconds once you cast it, increases its attack speed by 60 for 35 seconds. 60 is a good steroid effect, and it does scale up to 100% attack speed. The 100% attack speed is very noticeable. I would say this is a good bar to measure attack speed buffs by. The more that you play with Komodo, the more you will notice that how big that attack speed steroid is, especially going along with that passive. When attacking, it also inflicts a bleed on the target. So what is bleed? Bleed deals damage equal to 1% of the target's max HP per second and increases their physical damage taken by 10%. However, this effect does not stack. The reason it says that is that burns in this game, as we looked at in Wrath's kit, they do stack. However, since this encourages extra physical damage to be taken, that does not stack. Admittedly, I need to look into if this would stack with things like Ein, who adds a physical damage increase in their kit. I'll be reviewing Ein in the next day or so. I'm off the next couple of days, so we're going to be doing a whole lot of these Evaluate the Epics. I want to see if the damages stack together. We'll have to find a target that's very easy for me to evaluate that against. So ultimately, this ultimate is a fantastic ultimate. It causing a bleed means that he is best suited for single target damage, right? So we have attacking one enemy 2 times, that's single target. Chance for burst damage on hit, that is single target. And then a bleed effect on hit is single target. So ultimately, Komodo is this Gatling gun of attack damage. He's just constantly swiping daggers and stabbing things up. He is fantastic as a fighter. However, when it comes to Wrath, and specifically Wrath's giant claymore, Wrath will feel a bit better by us giving him more gear and more dust compared to Komodo. And what I mean by this is that Wrath has a lot more front-loaded damage, and then when he goes into his ultimate, it is also a lot more front-loaded compared to Komodo. Komodo, where majority of his damage will actually come from, is this bleed effect, and from big targets with large life pools. So when you're talking about little skeletons or swarms of enemies, Komodo is not going to feel his best fighting those enemies. However, if something has a very large amount of HP, Komodo will probably feel a bit better than Wrath in a lot of circumstances. So specifically, if we're talking about bosses like Dragon or certain campaign bosses. However, Wrath again has better sustain in his kit and has some extra crit rate and crit damage in his kit over Komodo, meaning that Wrath will be a little bit easier to gear up or feel effective by gearing him up over Komodo. This does not mean that Komodo is bad. It just means that I would encourage you to give your resources to Wrath first, and then after that, especially like if you love Komodo's design. I absolutely loved Komodo's design. I thought he was a lion at first, and then I was looking at him and I was like, oh, he's a lizard in skeleton armor. That's pretty badass. Like the look of this is really good. The colors of it are absolutely amazing. I love his whole design. This is a beautiful, great looking champion. So I really like what the game has done with him. That being said, let's go on to his awakenings. Alright, so Awakening 1. When Blood Liquor is triggered, restores 50% rage. So Blood Liquor is his passive, right? So whenever he gets that random burst of damage, he will gain 50 rage. How much is 50 rage? Well, he has 900 before he can go back into his ultimate. Something I didn't mention when we were reviewing his ultimate, we can increase the duration of his ultimate and his initial rage. So when we first summon him out, he starts off with 0. When you fully skill dust him up, he will start off with 400 out of 900 rage, getting you to that first ultimate even faster. A lot of champions have this initial rage. That's not a unique to him thing. However, an additional 50 every time Blood Liquor activates, right? An extra 50 is very meaningful. Like, you know, he's gaining 1% every single time. And if we talk about, like, you know, what is 1% of 500, that's around 5 rage that he's regenerating every second from his attacks. And by naturally regenning, like if we look in hero details here, we do have a rage regen of 12, which is actually lower than most other champions. That's probably because of how frequently he's attacking. With that being said, every time that he activates Blood Liquor, he's restoring, instead of 5%, 10% of his rage. And that will add up very quickly on that first go. Then you go back down to, you know, 0 out of 900. So 50 out of that 900, the more times it is proccing, the faster you get back into that ultimate. And Komodo, just like Wrath, Komodo, you do get to activate his ultimate. So you get to choose when he ultimates. Admittedly, it lasts for 35 seconds, and I would say all of Komodo's damage is truly in his ultimate. So we want him in that ultimate as frequently as possible. I don't think rage regen is the way to go. I do think attack speed is better. A lot of champions in this game, not only attack speed do the benefits of, you know, you're hitting the enemy more often, so that means a higher damage output. But every time you connect with the enemy, right, every time you're doing damage, you are restoring rage during that time. So I would argue that attack speed is a lot better than rage regen. Rage regen has its place when you're not hitting an enemy and your champion's standing around for long periods of time. There is a place for it. It's not going to be bad on Komodo. It's just if you have the choice between attack speed and rage regen, I would encourage the attack speed. Crit rate plus 5%. Always very good, and especially when you're first starting off the game, any crit rate is very, very welcome. The longer that you play the game, crit rate does come easier to come by, but free 5%, that's never something I'm going to ignore. That means, cool, I have 5% less stats to worry about to make him the best version of himself that I can. Blood Liquor, so again, this is his passive, deals 50% more crit damage to targets inflicted with bleed. So this is fantastic, and again, the longer we keep him in his ultimate, the more damage he's dealing, as well as the more damage he's dealing to bleeding enemies who are already taking more damage because of the bleed effect. So his kit has some great synergy within itself. Awakening 4 has penetration increase, so that means he's ignoring armor. Always a fantastic thing to be ignoring your opponent's stats. And then Awakening 5, so this is our big game changer for him. When Blood Fury is activated, recovers 10% HP for every kill. This is definitely not bad. This is more of a campaign, or if you're using him in certain gear raids like 1 or 2. In 2, I would say this is probably very noticeable. In 1, I could argue you might notice it. I don't think he is well suited for 1. Maybe for killing the boss in Gear Raid 1, right? You might drop him in on the boss as the boss comes running down the field. But I do not love this as an Awakening 5. I genuinely think this is an unfortunate aspect for Komodo. And how we start off the video talking about comparing him to Wrath. Wrath's Awakening 5 lets him deal with everything. It doesn't matter if it's weak enemies, doesn't matter if it's swarms, doesn't matter if it's a boss. His ability just lets him kind of deal with everything. Komodo, and I don't know if this means that Komodo needs to get the killing blow. I would assume so. And with his 2 daggers, yes, he'll probably be polishing off some enemies. That 10% HP, a lot of times your healer is already taking care of that. I will say, though, maybe for faction trials, this might be a bit more meaningful than I realize. I don't use him heavily in my faction trials. You'll see on my account, we have tons of nightmares. So, unfortunately, Komodo has significantly dropped down the rungs for me. With that being said, the very next detail we're about to get into, where is Komodo going to be best at? How do we best take advantage of Komodo? So, let's talk about where we can use Komodo at. So, if we're talking about the campaign, Komodo is an amazing fighter for you to have in the campaign. He is always going to feel useful any level where you need a ground unit to be blocking off of a path, as well as not only is he going to be stalling things. Hello, little treasure. 1 reward remaining. Awesome. As you were playing through the campaign, having him and Rex kind of side by side, or him, Rex, and Barut side by side, all of them will feel very good anytime you need to block off a path or anytime you need to delay a path. Because he's an epic as well, his stats will be very high compared to some of the other rares that you might have on your account. And the fact that you can get him for free as well just means that he will be an amazing addition onto your account. Going into raids, I'm going to talk about the arena real quick first. In the arena, Komodo does have a very good place in single target DPS. So the arena does rotate between like aerial DPS. Obviously, he's going to be worthless there. Then you have sustained DPS. He's good in sustained DPS if you can set up the situation where he can continuously attack something. What I mean by this is you might need to use a defender to hold targets in place and then have Komodo off to the side attacking inward. We'll show that off in a level of where Komodo can be best used at. AoE, I would definitely not take him into AoE. Yes, he can kind of block things off a little bit or slow things down for you to have more time to use him. Unfortunately, though, single target is definitely his bread and butter, more than anything. So go through the raids. Promotion raids. Marksman. He can't attack the skies. I would never bring him to the marksman one unless you want experience on him. That would be the only reason to take him into that raid. Mages. There are certain levels in the mages where you could have him as a defender, stopping things from hitting your crystal. I don't think that's best for him. I would rather use a defender than Komodo. But again, for experience, Sunday, you're going to have to wait, babe. Come here. Come here. I'm recording a video. I can't fill up your food. Come here. I'll fill it up after this video, okay? Thank you. Endurance. He is perfectly fine in endurance. He's not necessarily a low enough cost that he would be my go-to, but he is perfectly usable. And the fact that he does synergize with Wrath, you can summon Wrath to block off one path and then Komodo to block off the other. And the two of them, along with a healer, should be perfectly fine. You might need a healer on each of them because of the level design. So he's perfectly fine there. In the melee attack, he does do very well. The big thing you need to be conscious of is, does he kill things off fast enough? As you get deeper and deeper into melee attack, there are enemies that are heavily armored or have bigger HP pools. And although Komodo is better into those targets, admittedly, we still do need to be careful. So I'm going to go into 14 here. Not for any particular reason.
It's all right.
Where I think Komodo is best is not blocking off a target. Game. Not blocking off a target, rather him attacking from the side, I think is where he will absolutely shine the most at. I need things to be moving. Game. Now, in the melee raids here, the deeper in that we get to go, eventually we do get to this point where our champions are regenerating HP every second. So he will feel perfectly fine here. But based upon the limitations that we have, you'd be best to do something like this, where you would have a tank out to tank the damage for Komodo, so that Komodo can just attack from the sides. Komodo, even though he has a decent defensive stat, he does not have a high defensive stat. He does not have a high HP pool. So with those elements in play, make sure that you're putting him in a position where he can succeed, or you need to put him in a position where he can he has some extra healer to help keep him alive. You could even go as drastic as to move him from this location back one, and then we could put another fighter out you know, here. So the two of them would be targeting this one square together and trapping anything that comes walking down the walkway to make the best effective Komodo.
Tempin, bring me the wounded at once.
Weird. That does not sound like a thing Komodo would say. Anyways, that's it for the promotion raids. Guild Boss. Komodo is absolutely brilliant in the Guild Boss. When I first started playing the game, I got Komodo onto my account. I liked the way that he looks. I like the fact that he has the 2 daggers. He was a very interesting character to me. I asked Global Chat. I was like, hey, how good is Komodo? And everybody was like, don't use Komodo. He's just fusion material. Just wait until you get Salazar. You'll be fine. The thing is, I didn't get Salazar until like 2.5 months into me playing the game. So with that being said, I don't agree with that concept of just wait until you get Salazar. Now, if you are somebody where you are paying for certain shards and stuff, or if you're paying to win a lot of in-game events and tournaments, by all means, you could probably hold off until you pull Salazar, but it is a gacha game, right? It is a roll of the dice whether or not you will get Salazar. There's no guarantee to get Salazar, and I don't know of any current event to get Salazar on your account. So with that being said, Komodo is very, very viable for you to use in Guild Boss. Guild Boss is this gigantic, massive HP target for your champions just to dump all their damage into. So with that being said, Komodo's bleed effect specifically shines greatly in this. And then he synergizes very well with Wrath. He gives him and Wrath give each other that attack speed steroid by summoning him out. So for that reason, Komodo is not a bad champion at all. And if you can manage to get him more attack speed so that he's constantly going into that ult and causing more and more bleeds to the dragon, that is specifically where attack speed might be more beneficial to have on Komodo than crit rate. Again, I still heavily encourage all players, try to get your crit rate up to 50 to 70%, and your champion's damage will feel very good for a long period of time. However, this is a champion where I do think crit rate and attack speed might be the best way to go, but obviously any attack percent bonus does increase that base damage. So he is a champion that he's going to be kind of desperate for all three. I do think that attack speed is one of the best ways to go on him to get him back into those ultimates. And then when you ultimate, it lasts for 35 seconds. 35 seconds of him constantly cutting and causing the target to bleed will be a lot of damage to Clan Boss. So just like people encourage Cuke for Clan Boss because Cuke has poisons, Komodo having that bleed also encourages the boss to take an extra 10% physical damage. So not only is Komodo increasing his own damage, he should be increasing any of your other physical champions as well. So Komodo and Clan Boss, I would say, is a high encouragement, and do not sleep on it. One of the next best places for Komodo is the Artifact Raid, and I absolutely want to show this off. I have Komodo just in some decent gear. He's wearing one of my Archer's gears. Not that they get equipped any differently, but he's in decent gear, just not super amazing gear.
It has been a while.
Here you can see I am stacking my nightmares. I have tons of nightmares on this account. We are stacking my nightmares together to get the most of their passive bonus of attack speed for me to take advantage of the Artifact Raid. In the Artifact Raid, we are primarily attacking one target. Where's my healer? I switched over to Vortex for some reason. Weird. I wasn't even doing a Vortex video. But as the boss comes down, we need somebody tanky enough to tank the damage. Now, your level might look a little bit different as you start Artifact Raids or once you unlock Artifact Raids in the hard campaign. But we are attacking a single target, which is Salazar. And here, the reason I have it in slow motion is I'm waiting for that right foot to come down as he steps into this final location. So there it is. I'm going to summon him, and then this is going to allow me to set Komodo on the side here. And as Komodo is attacking from this back fourth square, increase the speed. the longer we fight Salazar, the more portals he will open up. And what we can do is we can... Alright, so I didn't let Salazar actually step as far in as I wanted to. So here, Wrath was supposed to be attacking him, and I kind of messed it up, but that's okay. So here's Komodo's ultimate. There's the bleed. Every single attack is going to be causing a bleed. Now my Salazar has an artifact on him that... My mouse. I'm going to kill it. Anyways, I would want Salazar attacking Salazar. My Salazar attacking enemy Salazar. But Komodo guaranteeing this bleed will increase your Salazar's damage as well. So ironically, you have this amazing synergy with Komodo, with other bleed champions, that their bleeds can, even though they don't stack off of each other, they will encourage each other. So Salazar can do an extra attack against bleeding targets. So that is one reason that he synergizes great with Komodo. Both of these champions are dagger champions, meaning they both scale off of attack speed. So both of them will be constantly attacking and bleeding the target. They kind of do a very similar job to each other. So that is why earlier in the video I told you, people were telling me, don't worry about Komodo. He is just fusion material. This is where Komodo can shine though. Him in these single target, killing a boss with a very large HP bar. Here you can see I'm having to use Wrath to keep away some of these summons. As these summons reach the boss, they heal the boss and cause the boss to get an attack speed, or attack damage steroid. So, ideally here, we want him dying as quickly as possible. I've mispositioned a champion, and then Salazar, I messed up with my mouse. So, unfortunately, this is a dead run. But in things like Dragon, in things like Artifact Material Raid, Komodo is absolutely amazing. I am not telling you that means you need to rush work on him. I am saying, though, that he is a very valuable asset onto an account. He would not be bad for you to build up. In the Tide is a battle power check, or a BP check, as it is often called. He is perfectly fine to bring there. He will pull his weight there. Again, the higher his BP is, so the more crit rate you give him, the more attack bonus you give him, and the more attack speed you give him, that will raise up your BP. Because he's a pure damage champion, it is very, very easy for you to skyrocket his battle power, along with champions like your Voltus, your Ein, your Wrath, those types of champions. With that being said, though, is Komodo bulky? No. Tide is called Tide for a reason. It is hundreds of enemies coming down at once. So yes, he can eliminate some of the enemies pretty quickly in the early stages. As you get further into Tide, his usefulness does wane down significantly, though, because Tide is about the AoE killing of things with a few big bosses here and there. But he typically can't survive the big boss's hits. So I would say early Tides, and by early, I mean anything like 80 and below, Komodo is perfectly fine for Tide. I would say as you approach 80 or start to get above 80, Komodo's usefulness will dwindle. However, it also depends, because if you take Komodo to 6-star, I would encourage you should have all your 6-star champions geared up just for Tide. At bare minimum, even if you throw trash gear on them, it will still be extra stats and extra BP, which will help you accomplish Tide. As you can see, I'm only up to 114. My Tide significantly slowed down when I was like at like 90 to like 95. That's when I was like, oh crap, I'm hitting these giant walls where I'm having to 6-star champions to push my Tide further. I think there's only 130, 140 levels in Tide altogether. So I'm getting pretty close to like the end of Tide and just needing all 6-star champions, all max gear, and all decent at AoE damage. Because so far right now I have certain champions like Indril, who she's not terrible in Tide, she's also not fantastic for Tide. She's kind of in this weird middle ground for Tide. Resource Raid. He is perfectly fine in the Resource Raid. I wouldn't say he's going to be like the best in here, or somebody that you absolutely are going to like notice his effectiveness in here. One of the big things that you can do with Komodo specifically is you can put him in either one of these two slots, to block the...
Daggers feed
I hate this mouse so much. You can put him here to block the path, and then you can put a defender behind him. And what this will do is that as 3 enemies approach, and Komodo cannot block 3 enemies, but he can block 2 enemies. So as he's killing off some of the 2 enemies at a time, with the defender behind him specifically, as things try to get through, they will get stuck on Komodo. Or, I'm sorry, they'll get stuck on this back defender. And then Komodo can more easily start picking away at them after he kills off the targets he's blocking. Now, I am aware something got through. Understand that as we... I hate this game so much. My mouse. I hate my mouse more than anything right now. One of the big limitations for Komodo, again, since he is a single target damage dealer, he is not great for certain content like this. However, will he put out plenty of damage, especially against these higher HP goblins? Absolutely. He will be absolutely fantastic at killing off the higher HP champions.
There will be hell to pay.
It's the same thing with the gold raid, by the way. The gold raid, a lot of the enemies have a much higher HP pool. So if you were struggling to kill off some of those big HP targets, again, I do encourage Wrath because a lot of Wrath damage is right up front. Whereas Komodo is much better for boss killing because he is draining the boss's HP pool, or just single target DPS. Wrath and Komodo synergize really well together. So you could put Wrath and Komodo side by side or back to back in these 2 raids, and they will help kill off those extra high HP targets. Not necessarily the little goblins. They're fine about killing the little goblins, but understand your AoE champions are better designed for that. Gear raids. So there's an ironic thing for Gear Raid 1. Komodo I would not say is great for Gear Raid 1. Again, we can argue for killing off the boss. Komodo is perfectly fine. You could wait until the boss summons, comes up to the wall, then drop Komodo in there to start trying to target the boss. But as your AoE mages are killing off all the little minions, Komodo could potentially causing the main enemy to bleed. For me, I was able to put Wrath and Komodo behind the wall, and they were able to hit the frontmost targets and finish them off consistently enough that my AoE mages were able to clear the rest. And that is actually what pushed me from... I forget what gear raid I got stuck on. On my first playthrough, I was stuck at like gear raid 10, and the synergy of Wrath and Komodo ended up pushing my gear raid 1 further, and everybody was like, that makes no sense. Yes, but if my Wrath is attacking instead of 5% faster, 10% faster, he's also getting to his ultimate 10%, like, an extra 5% faster. He's attacking 5% faster. Their damage output was enough, and they were geared up for Dragon, so their damage output was fine for Gear Raid 1. I don't think it is the best use for Gear Raid 1, because Gear Raid 1 is just swarms of enemies, and again, Komodo definitely struggles with the more numbers. Gear Raid 2, I would say he's perfectly fine. The rolling golems do a set amount of damage based upon the maximum HP of the target that they collide with. So if we have Komodo out and a roller comes down and runs into Komodo, it is going to do I think it's like 60 or 70% max HP damage as physical to Komodo. That is why your defenders are so effective in Gear Raid 2. They'll take less than that 60% damage because it's being dealt as physical damage to the champion. However, Komodo isn't a tank, so after the golem comes out of his roll, his first slap attack may kill off your Komodo. So I don't think he is best here, but this is also where we talked about with his Awakening 5, his ability to gain back HP. He does have a good opportunity here in Gear Raid 2. Gear Raid 3 is the same thing. This is all piercing damage. Therefore, we do not want to bring Komodo here unless we want it for the EXP. The last place to talk about is the Void Rift. The Void Rift, understand, you are using your best champions and trying to use them in their best manner in the Void Rift. There's going to be some levels where Komodo will potentially feel absolutely worthless. And then if you have him 6-star, there might be levels where Komodo feels absolutely brilliant. You are going to have to decide where he is best at in your Void Rifts. On a boss fight level, Komodo is going to shine on those boss fight levels as long as he can survive. That is a very big nuance I'd like to say. So make sure that as you get Olag onto your account, because he's a free epic that you get in the Void Rift, he's amazing for Void Rift content, so do not sleep on him. If you can set up a position where Olag can block the boss, and that might mean you have to put Olag much further back and near your defense crystal, you could then summon Komodo from behind the boss to attack the boss from the backside. And then as long as your Komodo is surviving AoE blasts, your Komodo will put out enough damage just fine. So ladies and gentlemen, that is Komodo, the Skeleton Assassin. I hope that this is useful for some of you newer players or some of you free-to-play players. And if you're a veteran player and you're like, oh wow, I didn't realize that his bleed has so much synergy with like Salazar or other physical attackers, you should say hi in the comment section. It helps with the algorithm, helps me blow up. Guys, thank you very much for watching. I greatly appreciate the support. And of course, until that next time.